everyone, Siske2 here. Today we're going to be taking a look at the KSC or KWA Vz61s, and in specific we're going to be taking a look at how to change our black plastic factory grip out with a surplus Czech wood grip. Now you can pick up these Czech surplus wood grips online. They're largely used. You can find them in a variety of conditions though. We've got a couple here shown that are unfinished that I picked up, and then they also come in kind of a broad range of colors, everything from blonde wood all the way to kind of a darker finish here. But to start, we're going to take apart our KSC Vz61 just a little so we can take a look at how this all works and what modifications we need to make in order to install this. Now I have shown here a separate KSC Vz61 lower that has a real rate reducer or kind of that grip plunger assembly in there. So we'll take a look at that quick too. But let's go ahead and get started. First, I like to have a punch set to take out that bottom cap, because otherwise getting this cap loose is pretty difficult. So let's go ahead and take out the magazine, and then we'll just slide our punch through and give it a twist. There we go. Now this is under spring pressure, so you'll want to twist it a bit and then cover it with your whole hand and kind of untwist the rest of the way, and it'll pop out. Make sure to keep all these pieces there and that plunger. So there we go, we can set that aside, and now we can just slide our grip right off down the bottom. So if we set this here, we can set aside our Vz61. We'll come back to that here in a bit. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and take this one off as well, because it's one that I have already modified to fit and should be good to go. This is something that sometimes when you unscrew that, it'll bring the whole thing out. So there are a couple options on these, and I'm going to pull these all off so we can take a look at all of them. I don't know if this one required a shim. I don't think it did. There we go. Perfect. All right, so we have everything disassembled here, and we are good to go. So, as we set these side by side, we'll notice a couple differences with these. One, the KSC and KWA grips are a little bit longer than the Czech surplus grips. So we're going to need to have some sort of shim in there. Otherwise, once we modify our grip on there, it's going to kind of have a little bit of flex and move up and down on that tube. It won't be nice and snug. So that will be our first thing, and we'll tackle that. And then second, we'll notice when we look at one of these grips side by side, we can notice that the KSC or KWA grips, here I'm going to set this one on the other side because it might be easier to tell with a couple different types of wood. We can see the rear section of the Czech surplus grips is more in a half moon shape, where it's a little bit squared off on the KSC or KWA. Similarly, up here we have these sections kind of extending a little further out, whereas these are just kind of some square nubs. So what we're going to need to do is trim this here and a little bit on the sides in order for it to fit with the KSC or KWA. So we've got a couple examples here that have been modified, and you can see this one's actually quite good for it. We can see on this one that we have just kind of reprofiled that back section slowly but surely to be a little bit more in line with this. And then similarly, we take just a little material off the sides. So, how to best approach doing this? What I would highly recommend when you're approaching this, have a couple files on hand. If you use a large wood file, you are going to take wood off too quickly. So I'd recommend, this is actually a metal file, but it works fairly well for this process. Additionally, I'd recommend some sandpaper. Have a couple types of file on hand. I'm just showing one here, but having some small needle files is super helpful as well. Having a bit of sandpaper is also very, very, very helpful to do kind of that final touch in there. And then lastly, sometimes it is nice to have just a small knife to kind of clean up any rough edges or make sure that you're kind of all the way in there. So our first step in this process is going to set things side by side, and what I would recommend is just kind of approximating, taking a look. You can measure these out and be very specific with it, but you'll ultimately just kind of make a mark on the back side. If you are just kind of eyeballing it, which is definitely doable, make a mark on the back side, take a look on the sides here, and then make some of those changes. If you start top down like this, you're going to end up having it kind of float side by side. So just start back here on this back side and kind of very carefully and slowly take this down. This is one that I recommend do by hand and take your time with. You'll want to take a little bit of material off and then check fit. So we'll take it and we'll put it on. This is definitely not going to fit because I really haven't taken any material off there. And we can see, oh, okay, we're not fitting. And so then we can go ahead and take a little bit more off. And as you go, take a look. You can kind of peek in there and see in that little gap, where are we sitting? Where do we have extra gapping? Where do we have areas that are in the way. So we want to be very precise with that, because if we take too much off of our sides here, we're going to ultimately have play side by side in that grip, which is no good. Similarly, if we take off too much in the rear or too much on the sides in the rear, we'll have play side by side in the rear. So we want to be very slow but sure. Take a file, finishing with sandpaper, that we're just gonna basically fold and do that same thing up in there, just kind of cleaning around there, and if need be, a knife for just kind of finishing, because oftentimes this is a pretty small lip. Oftentimes you're going to have a little bit of a kind of a curve up, and you want that to be nice and smooth so it can fully sit into the Vz61 receiver. So now how to get these onto our Vz61. So if you are using the VZ60 or the KSC or KWA rate reducer, you need, or this whole grip assembly, you can just leave it exactly as is. If you are using a real one, like is shown in here, you're going to need to make some modifications. The real rate reducer, as you can tell, is a little bit shorter. We can see our end here versus here, so we don't have to make any modifications for slipping the grip on there. The things that we do need to make modifications are this plunger does not fit into the real one. It'll get stuck partway in. And this one has a real plunger in there right now, or a modified KSC plunger in there right now, but it won't fit as is. So you'll need to end up kind of opening up the sidewalls in there so that can fit, and then go from there. As most folks are likely going to be using this kind of KSC, KWA rate reducer assembly, what we ultimately want is to have it screwed into the gun. So if it unscrewed like this one did, go ahead and take off this end cap. You can put a wrench on there and then go ahead and use your punch to take that apart. I think I might be able to do this by hand. There we go. But go ahead and take the end cap off, because you're ultimately going to want to shim on the end. From there, we can take this apart, set it aside, and we'll screw it back into our gun. If you're doing this, always make sure that your replica is unloaded, and we took out the magazines first thing. You do not want to negligent discharge in your room or into yourself or anything along that line. So from here, there's a couple options. You saw with this one, just a couple pieces of foam that were used in there. Another option that works very well is a large O-ring. So we need an O-ring that's about this size and fairly thick. And let's go ahead and grab one of those here. So I just have a Harbor Freight O-ring set here. These can be super handy, but this is a good spot to start for getting an O-ring for this. So we ultimately want something that is right around the size of right in here. So we can see with these Vz61 grips, we have two diameters in here. We've got the smaller inner diameter that is what our plunger or our rate reducer, this whole metal assembly slides into, and then we've got the end that our cap goes into. Now, if we don't have a shim, this will ultimately bounce up and down, and so what we need is something that'll be kind of larger than this diameter, but small enough so it'll fit in there. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple O-rings. That one is likely a little large. I think we'll ultimately end up with either an R17 or an R16. Let's go ahead and try an R17 there. We can see that fits nice and snug. And we want something that has enough bite so we can compress it down and make sure that things aren't wiggling back and forth, but also not something that is too thick, because otherwise our end cap will stick way out. We saw with the stock grip, the end cap was flush with it. Some real Vz61s, the end cap is not always snug and flush, but we don't want it to be sticking out a super long ways. So let's go ahead and slide our grip back on. We are kind of going ahead and saying, hey, we've already modified this. These ones have already been modified, so we have done the work on these ones. And this one is being picky to slide back on. I'm gonna try this one. I think that other one is for the other VZ. And this might need a little bit of coaxing to get on, so if you have kind of a rubber mallet to knock that on, that might be a good move. We can next take and go ahead and slip that O-ring on there, and we'll just kind of push it down just a tidge to make sure that everything is lined up, and we can put our cap on. And as you can see with this one, a piece of foam, anything like that also works very well. We just need something that's relatively small, but can be compressed. And then we'll go ahead and put our cap back on and tighten things down. These caps can be a little bit of fun to get in place, so just be careful to not have it shoot out and bonk you in the face or anything like that as you're in the process of putting it back on. I like to kind of keep pressure on it as you turn and get it a few turns in before letting go. And now at this point, we just go ahead and tighten it down and we will be in business. This one, there we go. There we are. We're sticking out just a tidge further than I would like on this one, so I will ultimately pull this and kind of sand down that O-ring a bit so it's more the depth that I would like. But again, just go ahead and pull that out. You want something that's relatively thin, but just enough so that grip can't wobble, can't move back and forth. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out on HRC, and thanks for watching.